Alright, in this problem I'm going to solve something that's similar to the cliff problem on your classwork on constant acceleration. So let's say somebody throws an object up off of a building at an initial velocity of 20 meters per second and the building's 80 meters tall. The first part of the question asks you to find time. However, I've already done a problem like this, the helicopter problem is similar to this. It's the trampoline sample problem, and it's a quadratic, and I've already calculated out at 6.47 seconds. So I'm not going to take the time to redo that, but I am going to look at the other two parts, B and C. Okay, this might come into play. Most likely we can solve it without the actual time. So the second part says, what is the speed just before hitting the ground? So what is the final velocity of the object when striking, going up in the air some amount, and then coming back down and hitting the ground? So other information we know that it's starting at a positive 20 meters per second. Anytime something's flying through the air, I have acceleration, which is gravity. And then I have D, the displacement. Now, remember that this is our coordinate, this is our original position, and this is our final position down here at the ground. So our displacement is actually a negative 80 meters down. Right? And so by looking at this equation, I should recognize at this point that it doesn't have time in it, so this is the equation that we can use to solve for that. And so we get V final squared, what I'm trying to solve for, is equal to V initial squared, so 20 squared, plus 2 times a negative 10 times a negative 80, right? So this will end up being a positive and cancel. So we'll have 10 times 80 times 2. We're going to add that. Oops, I added 2. So 10 times 80 times 2 gives me 1,600 plus 20 squared, which is 400. So I get 2,000 is VF squared, and then take the square root. So the final velocity as that thing slams into the ground is going to be 44.7 meters per second. All right. Now, the next part of the question asks you, what is the total distance traveled? So remember, distance is a scalar. It's different than displacement. It's the total ground covered. So it would be the amount up plus the amount down. And in order to solve this problem, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to divide the problem in half. And I'm going to figure out the distance up and the distance down and then add them together. So one of the other things that's important to note then about this problem is that the velocity at the apex is going to be 0 meters per second. All right? So for the left-hand side of the problem, the distance up, I know that I have an initial velocity of 20 meters per second, and I'm going to say I have a final velocity of 0, because that's what it is up at the top. Acceleration is negative 10, and I want to know d, or the distance. So again, same equation as I used up here. Vf squared, so that's going to be 0, is equal to 20 squared, which is 400, plus 2 times negative 10, and then I will solve for d. Okay. Well, oops, sorry, this is 400. Right? So if I bring this over here, I get negative 400 divided by negative 20. So the distance up to the top is going to be 20 meters. Okay? So that's part of it. Now I need to figure out the distance down here. Well, I have the final velocity at the bottom. So that allows me to use this same equation again. This time, I'm going to say that my V initial is 0 meters per second because I'm starting at the top. My V final is 44.7. My A, again, is negative 10, as always. And so I'm just going to solve for D this way. So I'll take 44.7 squared is equal to 0 plus 2 times the negative 10 times D. And this will end up being a negative number because this really means displacement, and I'm using acceleration. But it's a distance, so we can just take the absolute value of that to get the scalar quantity. So I take 44.7 squared, and then obviously that cancels, and I'm going to divide by 20 or negative 20, and I get about 100 meters. So 100 meters from here down. So what would the total distance be? It would be this plus this. So the answer to distance total is 120 meters.